Hi, welcome to this lecture about the reading in the Norton Field Guide to Writing, chapters 47 and 48. These chapters 47 and 48 should be a review of the material that you have learned from Comp 1. Ideally, you should have already read these chapters in your book. And I do hope that you have printed out this PowerPoint presentation so that you're able to take some notes in the margin. I'm going to refer you to specific places in the textbook that you should look at, particularly examples of some of the things that we're talking about. So we're going to begin by reviewing the rules about quoting, paraphrasing, and summarizing any information that you use in any of your papers. The reason that we are starting the semester with this review is that your success in this course depends wholeheartedly on your ability to follow these rules exactly when you are writing. If you plagiarize your work, you will receive a 0, and it is very possible that you would be removed from the course and receive an F. Of course, once you are out of an academic setting and in the workplace, as I'm sure you know, any type of plagiarism comes with a heavy cost. So it is worthwhile to review these things. When you are writing, you want to have your textbook with you. For example, even though I teach English, I'm constantly having to look up certain rules about creating a works cited entry, or certain rules about how to properly cite something that maybe I don't cite often. So everyone will usually have at his fingertips something with the rules in it. So I really encourage you to have those handy. So let's get started. We're going to start by talking about taking notes. And when you are doing your research for your paper or doing research for your literary analysis papers, you want to come up with your own style of taking notes. Some people like to use note cards. Some people like to highlight. I'm particularly fond of highlighting. I would encourage you, just from my own experience, to print the sources that you are using rather than trying to just look at the computer screen. But regardless, whatever you choose to do, whether it's highlight your information or use note cards or keep a Word document on your computer, you need some plan, something that's going to work for you. So you can begin by, as I just said, using a computer file, note cards, or a notebook. Whatever you choose to do, make sure that you label each of your entries with the information that you need to keep track of where it comes from. So this would include the author, the title of the source, and the pages or the URL if you're getting it from the internet. So at a very minimum, that should be available wherever it is that you're taking notes on that source. That leads you to the next one. Take notes using your own words and your own sentence patterns. So if you make a note that's really detailed and you're paraphrasing it, you need to label it as such. So, for example, if you're taking notes on a note card, or you're taking notes even in a Word document, after you've taken your notes, make a note somewhere on that card whether you paraphrased or whether you actually took it word for word. Doing so will make sure that you are properly documenting. It's kind of like a cross check to make sure that you're not making a mistake. If you find wording that you want to use word for word, then make sure you enclose it in quotation marks. This is distinguishing your words from the source's words. And please double check to make sure that you have accurately quoted whatever information you're using, that you have not actually plagiarized. So be very careful. And that leads you to the last point, and that is to use subject headings. So regardless of where you're taking notes, whether it's on a note card, whether it's on a document, label each note with a subject. So for example, if you're doing a research paper and you're writing about your topic is controversy in education, and you are particularly looking at the usage of technology in education, and one of the things you are looking at is that it contributes to attention deficit issues, then all of those notes would be about attention deficit disorder. So you would want to label that card as such so that you are only taking notes on one subject at a time. This will help you specifically when you begin to make your outline, because you will already know how many notes you have on a particular subtopic. You'll be able to organize your notes. So again, label it with a subject heading. I want to encourage you to really look at page 463 in your textbook, because it does give you several examples of how notes look like when you're taking notes. So how do you know when to quote, paraphrase, or summarize? Well, let's look at it. You want to use direct quotes sparingly throughout your papers, because you are quoting when the exact wording is worth repeating. In other words, you're quoting when there is absolutely no way to reword it. You could not do it justice by rewording it. So, in other words, you're going to take that author's words exactly. So, again, you want to quote sparingly, and that is one way in which you know to quote. You can also use the exact words when the authority on the topic challenges or disagrees with others, or when the source is one that you want to emphasize. Otherwise, you need to be paraphrasing or summarizing. So we want to paraphrase sources that are not worth quoting but contain details that you want to include. We want to summarize longer passages where the main idea is important but maybe not all of the details. When you are quoting, you want to make sure that you are incorporating short quotes into your text. And the reason is that you want to weave those quotes into your sentences so that your sentences read seamlessly. I always like to think it's a legal way to steal someone else's words and put it into your sentence to help your sentences flow and read better. In doing this, though, you want to reproduce the source exactly. If you decide to take out any unnecessary details, you need to use ellipses. And if you are changing any of the information so that perhaps it fits grammatically into your sentence, you want to make sure that you use brackets. And if you look in your textbook on pages 464 and 465, there are examples of this to help you with a visual so you can see what that looks like. Longer quotes that you want to use, again, this is something that you would use very sparingly, but a longer quote, longer than 4 lines, is called a block quote. And you want to set that off following the specific rules to do that. You actually are going to, if you're using MLA style, set off quotes of 5 or more typed lines by indenting the quote 1 inch from the left margin, and all of the lines then would follow that same rule. If you are quoting 3 or fewer lines of poetry, then they get quoted in your sentences just reading as if you were just typing the sentences normally. You do separate poem lines with slashes. However, if you end up with 4 or more lines of poetry, then they are set off in a block style. Again, examples of this are on pages 464 and 465 of your book. Once again, please make sure that if you delete words that are unnecessary, that you insert 3 ellipsis marks to indicate the deletion. If you omit an entire sentence or more in the middle of the quote, you want to put a period before the 3 ellipsis dots. You do want to make sure that you are indicating any changes or additions to the author's words by using brackets. Again, most of the time this is used to make a verb fit grammatically in a sentence. Maybe you might change the tense of the verb to fit the present tense. So you always want to use that correctly. And regardless, you want to punctuate correctly with your quotes. And in your book on pages 466 and 467, there are examples of this, 466 and 467. You can find rules about how to use periods and commas within the inside of the quote. You can look and see the rules about question marks and exclamation points. And you can also see the rules for using colons and semicolons. And again, that's in your textbook. When you're paraphrasing, remember you're restating information from a source in your own words, and you are using your own sentence structure. A paraphrase is typically the same length as the original of whatever it is that you are paraphrasing. I really want to encourage you to look at pages 467 through 470 in your book, because there are several examples of paraphrasing which is acceptable and paraphrasing which is unacceptable. Again, you're in Comp 2 now. This is a review of what you have learned from Comp 1. So I am expecting you to go to your textbook and look at those things to refresh your memory about what would and would not be appropriate. Again, make sure when you're paraphrasing that you are including all of the main points from the source. As I said, your paraphrase is about the same length as the original. Unacceptable paraphrasing would be an instance where you're borrowing too much of the original language. You are borrowing the original language as well as the original sentence structure. And I do want to remind you that that would be trying to say, for instance, insert your own verb in place of the author's verb. You cannot take what's at the end of the sentence and move it to the beginning of the sentence and just change the sentence structure. Not only is that still considered plagiarizing, but you are likely then creating a situation where you're writing in passive voice, which you don't want to do. And if you are patch writing, then you're basically doing a little bit of both of those, and you want to avoid that. So again, let me remind you, please look at your textbook. Go back to 467 and read the examples through page 470 to refresh your memory about what would be acceptable and what would not be acceptable. So, to paraphrase correctly, use your own words and sentence structure. Sometimes it's helpful to read a portion of whatever it is that you want to work with and then turn it over and make your notes. That way you're writing from memory, and you can then go back and look to make sure you got facts and statistics and specific information correctly, but it's virtually impossible for you to plagiarize when you do that. Put in quotation marks any of the source's original phrasing that you use, and please indicate the source that you paraphrase. Again, just because you paraphrase does not mean that you don't have to cite, and we'll get back to that in just a minute. When you're summarizing, state the main ideas of the source concisely and in your own words. Remember, a paraphrase is going to present the specific details in the article, but a summary is not. A summary is going to boil down basically the entire article or essay into maybe a sentence or a paragraph or more. So it's very different from a paraphrase. Again, no details, just the big picture. Include only the main ideas, leave out the details. Just as paraphrasing, use your own words, and again, indicate the source. When you are summarizing or paraphrasing, you want to introduce a quote by mentioning the source. This is really important, and it will be very important that you use this in every essay that you write. So you want to indicate who the author is writing. In most cases, you should know his or her credibility, which you can also refer to. And you want to give the title of the article. Your book actually provides a really nice list of common signal verbs on pages 473. It will help you so that you're not being repetitive. But here are some common ones: acknowledges, admits, advises, agrees, argues. But again, there's a list much longer than that in your textbook. Your verb tense when you are introducing quotes is always in the present tense because we do use MLA in English. Okay, let's talk for a minute about how we acknowledge sources to avoid plagiarism. So if you use another person's words or ideas without acknowledging them, that is plagiarism. And as I said in the beginning, it is a serious academic and ethical offense. So again, this is why we're spending so much time going over it. Now, these are the types of sources that you should always acknowledge. And again, that would include the author and the page number, if that's applicable, the title, as it would appear in your works cited page. So we always want to directly acknowledge direct quotes. Again, you would want to lead into that direct quote with a signal phrase that tells who wrote it, and try to contextualize the information. You will cite arguable statements and information that may not be common knowledge, the opinions or assertions of others, any information that you didn't generate yourself, which would include interviews, statistics, graphs, charts, visuals, and photographs, and any collaboration you have with others. So this is a good list to help you remember that these are all the things that you're expected to cite. Now, there are some things you don't have to necessarily cite. Now, I'm going to go ahead and say up front, if you're in doubt, cite it. You can't go wrong. If you're in doubt, cite it. We typically do not cite information that readers likely know, for example, who wrote a particular book. But if you get into the details of how that book was published or specific things around its publishing, then you would cite. If there's information or documents that are widely available, then by all means, we typically do not cite them. For example, when Neil Armstrong landed on the moon, we probably don't need to cite that because it is widely known. Well-known quotes, for example, things from Shakespeare or other famous people like JFK or Winston Churchill, we typically would not cite those. Any material that you created or gathered yourself, you typically do not cite. Now again, let me say it one more time. If you were in doubt, cite. You can't go wrong. We want to avoid plagiarism. So when you use other people's ideas or words without giving them credit, that is plagiarism. And it is not enough for you to say, I didn't mean to. That wasn't my intention. I didn't know that. Those excuses will not work. They will not get you credit, and they will not get you reinstated into a class. So there are no excuses. The burden of proof falls on you. If you want to avoid plagiarism, then let's review everything that we've talked about. We want to take careful notes. We want to be careful to include all of our citations, both in text and in the works cited. We want to recognize that it's easy to plagiarize even if we don't mean to. And we want to remember that it is a very serious issue with heavy consequences. Again, this lecture comes from chapters 47 and 48. I would encourage you that with every writing assignment you complete this semester, you have this book with you so that you can constantly turn to these chapters when you need a refresher about how to properly use punctuation or how to properly integrate a quote or what you need to or don't need to cite. As always, I'm here to help you, so please don't hesitate to ask. I will be more than happy to work with you on any questions that you might have. Good luck to you.